Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Art 195. It's the fall 2021. 3D computer graphics. 3D modeling for animation is the official title of the class. Anyway, today we're going to focus on the basics of 3D modeling, which are the primitives. As you can see over to the left in my Create tab, there's a little, it's very small, but there's a section that states that we have primitives. Primitives are just your basic shapes from which you can build most anything. And most of the time, a simple box or ball or whatever is all you need to get started. So let's work with that. And I will begin building our first assignment, which will be a table and lamp, and show you what I think is an efficient way to work, or a way that, I work to build most things. So we're starting with something simple and basic, and then throughout the semester, we'll get to things that are more complex. Okay. So one of the things that I like to have up at all times, it's absolutely not necessary, but I think it is really helpful, is the Numeric Requester. I talked about that the other day, but all you have to do is hit N on your keyboard, or it's down here at the bottom under numeric, and this little panel pops up. So every time we pick a new tool, it will give us the specifics of that. For example, if I select the box tool, that's a basic. Then what you need to do, you can either click and drag to create a two-dimensional flat plane, and then I'm doing that from the excuse me, from the top view, and then from either the back, front, or the right or left side, I can click and drag on the little orange widget and pull up the box, and then I can use the little spinner up here on the perspective view and see what it's looking like, how it looks. If I'm concerned about having a specific size, width, height, or depth, and location of this, and the location right now would be the center of it, would be that center would be the X, Y, and Z coordinates, and do that. Now, what we will also talk about soon, I can start that today. If you want to add a radius to the corners, if you want to add segments to it, because right now the cube or the box is based on six polygons, and that's it. Okay, you have your top, bottom, left, right, front, back. So that's the end. Now, if you want to get back to okay, let me pause just a second here. So there you go. And here we have a basic box. If you want to get back to the reset, you just do that. And then you have to make sure that you do activate if you do it this way. As soon as I click here, notice how it's changing the dimensions. So you do have to be careful. And then as soon as you click off of it, notice that it disappears. So when you're doing this, let's start with reset and then activate using the Numeric Requester. And then let's zoom in to see what we have. So I'm just going to use the zoom tool. And I can use the zoom tool here as well, because remember, this is an independent zoom in the the perspective view. When I'm ready to end this, what you do is you turn off the box tool. That finishes it. And then if I wish to edit it at some point, I need to use the modification tools. So when you're ready to use a tool, you select it. When you're done with a tool, you turn it off, and then that fixes it in space. Once it's fixed, these tools don't help you to change their properties. So that's a simple box. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a brand new layer here. Let's try another one. So we have under, again, the Create tab, we have a ball. And another thing about using these is that, and it will become more important later, right now it isn't, but the orientation of it. By default, the orientation is along the y-axis, so it's vertical. You know, you can see that the ball pinches at the top and the bottom. We can also orient it along the x-axis or the z-axis as well. So depending on what you're working on and what your needs are, that could be important. Right now, this is constructed by default of with 24 sides and 12 segments. And again, like we did with the box tool, we have the center and we can determine the radius from here. Remember, for a sphere, you have the X, Y, and Z coordinates. So if you want to make it bigger, right now it's the default size is 1 meter total. Now, if you don't like working in metrics, you can always work in light wave in standard units that we use. For example, if I wanted this to be 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, I would put in 1, and then I would put a single quote, and I would hit the tab key, and then I put in 1 single quote, hit the tab key, and then I put in 1 single quote, and then put in the tab key. So notice that it changes from inches to millimeters when I'm done. So 1 inch equals 304.8 millimeters. Not that it matters, but it does the conversion for you automatically. And if you want to go back and you just select reset and you want it to go back to 1 meter, 1 meter is a little over 3 feet. It's 39 inches, I believe. And that gives you, you know, you can change the size and everything from here. Now you can also, instead of using the polygons, you can also use tessellation. So now you can see that the sphere is constructed of 3-point polygons instead of the 4. If I go back to the polygon count, now this is where you can have fun with this and determine, because sometimes you don't need 24 sides. But as I change this and I go down to 8, 7, 6, and 4, notice how the configuration of the sphere changes dramatically when I do that by changing the number of sides. So if I go back to 24, which is the default, and the same with the segments, which is the vertical, notice how they change, it changes dramatically. Okay, so you can really start with a very simple primitive and come up with something quite complex. So I'll go ahead and we'll finish the ball here, and I'll go to a brand new layer, and let's select a disk. Why they call it a disk, I don't know, but if I click and I drag from the top view, I have just a 2-dimensional flat plane. But then from the back, front, or right, left view, if I click and I drag and I pull it up, I have a cylinder. So the disk is the tool that you use to create cylinders. And like the sphere, it has by default 24 sides. And if I want to make sure that it's a perfectly round cylinder, I would go back to actions and select reset. Notice that it uses the X as the default, the Y, and now it's perfectly round. So if you want something perfectly round or spherical, you have to remember that the X and the Z need to be the same. And then if I want to change the height, then I just change the Y coordinates here. Okay, so that's for a cylinder. And again, you know, most things are like Tinker Toys, whatever, they're constructed of basic primitive shapes. Whoops, I don't want 500 meters because that's the default size. There we go. And again, if I change the number of sides, you can see that you can get a variety of other forms that way as well. Okay, 24. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Then we have a cone. Now, many of these are self-explanatory. The disk was not, so I'll go ahead and I'll go back and reset and make sure that I activate. And I want to make sure that it's along the y-axis. So there's your cone. And again, if you wanted to create a pyramid-like shape, again, go from 24 sides down to like 4. So it makes it pretty easy for you to do something like that. Okay, not too hard. And then when you're done, or even when you aren't, remember you can resize this in any way that you want by clicking on the widgets. And I like working from the top, back, front, or right, left, and then looking at the end result in the perspective view. I rarely use the perspective view to actually make or edit my shapes. Okay. Let's go back, and there's our cone. We'll turn that off. They also have some unusual primitives that you'll probably want to take a look at. Here's one called the Capsule, and it's just that. It looks like a, the kind of pill. So if I reset and I activate, and I click, there's our capsule. And you'll notice that we have the center here, and we can change the radius, we can change the length, and we can change the number of sides, similar to what we have with the others. We can also add or remove some of the segments. As I do that, notice how it changes. The number of divisions. See how there are additional polygons are being added. And it's easy to add polygons. It's difficult to remove them. So if I go back to reset, okay, and I do this along the y-axis, you can see the little pill shape that I get from here. And all of these can be modified later on, but these are a starting point for all of us. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn that off. My favorite shape is the toroid shape. So that is basically a donut. So we'll come back here and I'll reset and activate. And here's our donut-like shape. And again, you can change from here, the inside radius, you can change the outside radius, like so. Using the widgets, or we can use the numeric requester to make those changes. So that's another one. And then there are more down here. There are unit primitives here, boxes, balls, planes, discs, cones. Okay. And from here, there are gears. So let me do a couple of the unusual ones, and that will be it for that. So I'm going to go ahead and fix it. And I'll select a brand new layer here. There we go. So let's look at some of the unusual ones under more. So gears can be useful, if you're creating something that's mechanical and you want to create a gear shape. We have that. Okay. Now, again, there are the settings. Let me go back again. Let me undo this. And select it again, because on my computer, the gear, here we go. This is what went elsewhere. So if you want, it was on a second screen that I use. The number of teeth, the inner radius, outer radius. So if you know specific size requirements, then that's what you have. Angular or gear type, angular or smooth. And you can go ahead and click OK, and there you go. There's your gear. It can, again, many of these can make short work of something that normally would take quite a bit of effort on your part. So let's go to another one. Let's see if we can't find one more unusual one that are here. They're worth looking at. Gemstone is kind of a fun one that's strange too. I'm just going to use the default settings here. And there you go. But, you'll notice that there's all sorts of proper names that are used in describing the parts of a gemstone. We have the crown. So if I change that, you know, that changes that. If I change the girdle, that changes that midpoint, the table. That's that little top polygon there. And then the pavilion, which I guess is the bottom part down here. And when you're done, you turn it off and you have your gemstone. So, it's worth, as I said, taking a look at all of these, because you never know, you might kind of go through a lot of effort creating something that might take you just a few minutes to create. Now, I put all of these on separate layers. And what I want to do now is I want to show you how I would build a simple table from this and work with all of the layers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete all of these. I don't need them anymore. I thought maybe I would. So just simply select the top corner of each of the layers and delete it. Whoops. So the first part of our assignment today, or for us to learn how to build, is a simple table and lamp. And you can do that by using primitives. Now, one of the things that we will be doing with a lamp, let me go ahead and show you that, for example, if I go ahead and activate this, here's the shape. One of the things that we'll be working with later on is if you want to use what are called subpatches or meta NURBs. So right now we're building our objects and making them look fairly rigid and precise and machine-like, that they were machined perfectly. So what sometimes you want to work with items and make them look a little bit more organic, like they were constructed of clay or a soft material. So once this is constructed, what you can do is when you hit the tab key, so if you happen to hit the tab key by mistake, it turns it into subpatches. And that softens it and shrinks it, and now it looks like a ball of clay. If I wanted to go back to its polygonal shape, then I hit the tab key again and it brings it back. You can do that with all of them, but you have to remember all of the primitives, but you have to remember that when you do use subpatches, you can only have a maximum number of 4 points on a polygon. And some of these shapes exceed the 4-point limit, so you wouldn't be able to use those. You'd have to construct them solely of 3- and 4-point polygons and then hit the tab key in order for that to work. So that's just something that we'll be using later. I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and let's go ahead and hit the A key to reset everything. And so the way that I like to work is that I'm going to start by building my table, and we're going to build something about the size of a card table and maybe exaggerate some of the proportions a little bit. So I'm going to start by using the Numeric Requester just for the heck of it. I want the width to be, whoops, let's go ahead and activate. I want the width of this to be maybe 30 inches, or maybe, yeah, 30 inches, why not? 30 inches, so to do the inches, I go ahead and I hold down the Shift key and I hit the double quotes. So that's 762 millimeters. I want the height of this to be maybe 2 inches. So it's a fairly thick table. Okay, 2 inches. So I hit 2 and I hold down the double quotes and I hit 2. Okay, so that flattens it now. Now I want the depth of this to be the same as the width. And I'm going to make it 30 inches, 30. So I've got a square table here. tab key. And then I'm going to raise it up. I want the center of this, the Y, to be at about 30 inches. That's about how high tables are when we sit at them. So I want 30 inches. That, and then I hit the tab key, and that lifts it up along the Y-axis. So at the moment, I'm being very precise, but generally speaking, when I work, if it optically looks correct, then I'm good to go. One of the things that I might want to do, because when you look at tables and tabletops, they don't have perfectly chiseled edges. And you can see that when I zoom in to this, okay, it is perfect. What if I want to round the corners just a little bit? So to do that, what I can do is I can add a radius here. So if I want it beveled, what I can add this like maybe 8 or 10 millimeters. Notice how it's beveled or chiseled a little bit, each of the edges. That might be too much, but let's go ahead and soften it. If I want them to be rounded, then I can add radius segments, and I'll go ahead and I'll add maybe 6 to 8 of those. When I do that, it's adding polygons, and notice how it's rounding that. So I'm going to pull this back to maybe 8 and 8, and it softens it a little bit. It makes it look a little bit more realistic. Most things in the real world aren't that perfectly machined. Some things are, some things aren't, but I think this is a good way of doing that. Now, another thing that I will show you too is that if you wanted to add geometry along the X, Y, and Z. So if I do that, let's say along the X, I want to add a few segments. See how it's dividing it up along the X-axis? And if I zoom in along the top view, you can see how these little lines appear. Well, those were additional polygons that appear all the way through. Sometimes you will want to add additional divisions, and sometimes you won't. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to remove those back to 1, and I'm going to finish that. Say, there you go. There's my tabletop. Now, what I like to do every time I create a part of an object, I mean, pretend we're at IKEA and we're receiving our table and it's in parts. When I'm done with one part of it, I like to create a default color for it, a default surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit the Q key, and that brings up change surface. And these are just going to be placeholders, nothing more, nothing less. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to name it, and I'm going to name it tabletop. And let's assign a color to it. Really doesn't matter what color. I'm going to make it blue. Because we're going to change it later. Probably on Wednesday, I will show you how to assign a surface to it and layout that make it look like glass or marble or wood or anything like that. So I have my tabletop done. And now I'm ready to create the legs. So what I want to do now is I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see a little bit better here, each of my units. Okay, and I want to now build the table legs. So there's a hard way of doing this and there's an easy way of doing this. I'm going to make my table legs. They could be rectangles as well, but I'm going to make them cylinders. So I'll use the disk tool. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click and drag from the top view. And if I do that and I pull this like up and I pull this down, you're going to see in a minute that I will have made a mistake. And now I just pull this all the way up to the bottom of the table. And I pull this down to the 0 point right here. Okay. And I'm going to move this over a tad, like so. So that's near the edge of the table. So there's my table leg. Now, if I want, I could finish it and I could go back again and I could select the disk tool and I could go ahead, and I don't want to reset it. I just want to activate. I hope I didn't reset it. I probably did. Shoot. I want to activate. There we go. And now I can move that over like so. And now I have another one. Now there's a problem with what I've done. I'll go ahead and turn that off. And the problem is that, remember, if I want to now select and create a surface for the table legs, I'm thinking, well, I've already set it for my tabletop and I hit Q for to create a surface, and I put in here table legs. And let's make them orange or something like that. Okay. And I click OK, watch what happens. Everything, because remember, if nothing is selected, then everything is selected. So I'm going to undo that. And I have a choice. I either should have made the table legs on a separate layer, or I should, the way that I change it now, because it will be much harder to move these if I need to make changes, is that I need to select just the legs. Now, the best way of doing that is clicking and dragging from the front or back, or the right or left. And let's go ahead here. I don't have, I'm going to go ahead and select, I have point selection. That's why it's not selecting. I need to remember to switch to polygons. Now I have a handful of polygons selected, but I want to select all of them. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select. And to do that, I go to select. And what I want to do is I want to say select connected. Now they're all connected, and I can delete and I can put it on a new layer. Paste, Command B, put the tabletop in the background. So now when I hit Q and I select, I don't want that to be default. I want table leg. Now it only affects that one because it's on a separate layer and the others are in the background. So what I want to do now, though, is I'll show you a more efficient way of doing this. So I'm going to select a handful of polygons. Actually, I don't have to. Well, I can just deselect, and because that's the only thing on the layer, if I hit Command X, it cuts it. If I go back to my first layer and I select a handful of polygons and I go to select connected, now I'll get rid of all of them. Command X. So now what I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm going to start by working on separate layers first. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and now select the disk tool. And I'm going to click and drag like so. Now these are kind of big. Let's zoom in a little bit so I can see what I'm doing here. And to make sure that it's perfectly round, what I need to do, and probably the right size, is I need to look at the numeric requester. And I'm going to look at the radius. And right now it's 20 millimeters, or a little over 20 millimeters. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in here, because that looks like a pretty good size. So I'll just put in 20 mm's for millimeters. And then for the Z, I'll do the same, 20 mm for millimeters. Now I know it's perfectly round. Now, instead of using the numeric requester, I'll zoom out a little bit and I'll pull that up from the top widget and pull this down from the bottom so that it reaches the floor. Now, before I do anything else, whoops, I didn't want to do that. Zoom out a little bit. There we go. We're good to go. Zoom in a little bit, move down a little bit, spin it around a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to go ahead and make it maybe 30 millimeters, and you'll see why later. And I'll make 30 millimeters here. And again, it's not really critical, the size. Whatever proportions you use are good. I'm going to go ahead and place this pretty accurately in the corner. And now what I want to do, if I want to make a duplicate of this on my new layer, I simply right click and drag and move it over. Oh, come on. There we go. I right click and drag and move it over. Now, I've obviously made some changes here that I don't want. So I'm going to undo both of those. Something happened here. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I'm going to go ahead and make it again. So I goofed. My hand hit the wrong button on the mouse. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And let's try that again. I'm going to go back with a disk. Click and drag like so. And let's make, again, I said I use 30 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and hit 30. And for the Z, I'll do the same, make 30 millimeters. No, not meters, millimeters. There we go. Make sure that it's centered here. And now I'm going to move this position over a little bit. Now I will right click. Whoops, not yet. Let me go ahead and make the length of this. Make sure I don't get too far ahead of myself. Zoom out a little bit. Now I'll go ahead and pull this up and pull this down. There's my first table leg. And now I'm going to zoom back in and right click on here to make a copy of it and move it over. Then I'm going to move this up. In fact, in order to be able to see this a little bit better, I'll click on this button here so I can see everything a little bit better. And then again, I'm going to right click and drag across until that fits. And then right click and drag across until that fits. Okay, now that I'm done with that, I can turn the disk off. And let's click on this button in the upper right-hand corner to go back to our quad view. And I can zoom out a little bit or just hit A to resize, to reset everything. And I have my table. I have to do one more thing. And that's to hit Q. And since I already created it for table legs, I'll do that and I'll click OK. Now, if I want, I use that analogy of IKEA that in the end, you know, they give you a box of parts and then you're supposed to put them together. Well, right now, when they're on separate layers, what will happen is that when I send it over to layout to do the final surfacing and rendering, it will come up. It will go over in those separate layers. Now, if you want that, if you want to animate them later and animate each layer independently of one another, you can do that. But I want to fix them together with screws and bolts and that sort of thing. So to do that, all I have to do with the table leg layer selected is hit Command X to cut, go back over to my tabletop layer, and now I hit Command V to paste. And now when I move them about, everything is attached and they work together nicely. Okay. Okie doke. So there's our first thing to make in here, which is a tabletop. I'm going to pause my recording for a minute, and I'm going to see if there are any questions from you, what I've covered so far. So let's go back up here and pause. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to save all of this. And if you recall, it doesn't hurt for me to go over this again, is that on my desktop, I created a folder named content. And within that folder, I placed additional three folders, one for images, one for objects, and one for, oh shoot, I'm drawing a blank here. I can't think. I'll find it in a minute. Just while I'm talking to you, I just have a brain freeze. So I'm going to go File, Save As. We have objects. And we also, scenes. Thank you very much. There we go. So I want it in the objects folder, and I'll name it table. Okay. Now, once it's saved, I can send it over to layout. I can do with it what I want. And then when it's in layout, I can assign different surfaces to it and proceed to render it. And that rendering is what you will send to me. What we can do is I can get started with the table lamp now, if we wish. And I like making my objects separate from one another, but what I will do is I will start a brand. I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to hit Command C for copy. And then I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to paste. Now I'm going to remove this when I'm done, but I'm using this for size and positioning only. So I'm going to go ahead, and while this one is unnamed, I will name it lamp. File, Save As, and we'll name it lamp. So just as when you go into IKEA, you know, you have all your separate items. That's what we're doing here. We're creating all the separate items that we will need for our first assignment, which is a table and lamp, and I'm going to create a little floor for it as well. So the lamp needs to fit on top of the table. So what I'm thinking is it's going to be kind of a retro look. I'm going to go ahead and use the ball for the base of my lamp. And I'll click and drag like so. And notice where it's appearing down here. I want it to be, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll pull it up. So I'm going to stretch it like so. And I'm going to move it up on top of my table like so. I need to make sure that it's round. So what I want to do is along the X and the Z, I need to make sure that I have, for example, I'll make it maybe 90 millimeters. 90 millimeters. And I'll hit the tab key and I'll make it 90 millimeters. So it's perfectly round. Okay, so there's the start of my table lamp. This is the base of it. Okay, so I can move this around and move this down like so. And now what I need to do is I need to make a base for this, because if it were sitting in the real world, it would just topple over. Okay, so what I need to do is I'm going to finish making the ball, and this is where we can begin to really modify the shapes that we've created. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select all the other parts and get rid of them. because I don't need them anymore. Let me go ahead and put all of this on a separate layer. So I'm going to go ahead and select connected. And I'm going to go ahead and hit X and put it on a separate layer. And let's put the table in the background. So I want to zoom in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and make sure that you have polygons selected at the bottom. I'm going to right click and lasso around this bottom set of polygons. And I'm going to hit Command X to cut. Now, when I do that, I've removed them. And if I look from underneath, you can see that I've created a hole in the bottom of my lamp. But now what I can do, and this is where, getting familiar with creating and using polygons or points. What I can do now is I can select points and I can right click and drag around that bottom row of points. So just the points are selected. And now what I want to do is I want it to flare out and expand it so it becomes a base for my lamp. So now I can use the modify tool. And the one that I want to use is the size. So I want to size it, and I want it because what size will do is it will size it uniformly. And I want it from the center of selection, not the mouse, because if I select the mouse and I size it, notice how it's just going every which way. It doesn't look right. So if I select the center of the selection, now when I click and I drag, see how it flares it out? Now I just need to hit T for move, and now I can move it down so it fits, it touches the top of the bottom of the table. Now I'm done moving, and I can turn off the polygon, the points, by selecting this, by just clicking in the lower left-hand corner and left clicking. And now this will be an instance where we will want to use meta NURBS or subpatches, because we want to smooth it out a little bit. But before I do, you'll see at the bottom, remember these are open polygons, we don't see anything. Well, I want to close the bottom. So I'm going to select points again, and I'm going to right click and lasso around that bottom row of points. And now to close that up, I need to turn those points into a polygon. So I'm going to hit P for poly. And now when I look at the bottom, notice that that closed it up. And now what I can do is I can hit the tab key, and I will get an error message because the bottom has more than 4 points, but it will still work for us. And now notice how it smoothed everything out, and rather than come to a sharp point at the bottom, it rounded it for us. So now I have everything that I need. I know approximate size. I have the approximate size. I have the position where I want my lamp to be. I no longer need the table. So I can select the table layer, and I can hit Command X to cut it. And I can go back here, and now I can continue to save and make my lamp. That's pretty much, I'm going to go ahead and hit Q to create a new surface for this, and I'll call it lamp base. And we'll make this maybe a purple color. There we go. So now we have the base of our lamp, and then we're going to, on Wednesday, we're going to make the lamp shade. Okay, so we've started with some very basic shapes. Then we've gone in, and with this one, especially with the lamp base, we've made them a little bit more complex. I've shown you how to use the Numeric Requester to add radial corners, how to size and place them accurately, and as well as using the widgets, and use layers as needed to separate them so that as you're building them, you don't have to worry about selecting the parts. That, remember, if they're on their own layer, if nothing is selected, then everything is selected, and then I can add surfaces to them, or I can modify them without worrying about changing the other parts in any specific way. Now, later on, if I wish to resize these, and I can resize them in layout, or I can resize them in modeler, or I can modify them at any time, I can do so. But right now we're ready to make the lampshade, and we're not going to make the interior parts of it because we're not going to see them. So I'm only going to make the lampshade. We're pretty much running out of time. So for today, I'm going to leave this for Wednesday, and I will review for you. If you have any questions for me, please let me know. And good luck to you guys. Okay, if you don't have lightweight, let me go ahead and pause the this statement. So this is all I'm going to cover for today. I'm going to go ahead and pause my recording, and this will be it for today. I will continue this on Wednesday. So hold on one second here. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and pause.